we'll start off just very briefly. I would very much want this to be almost a conversation between you two. Imagine you're sitting at a bar, shooting back, chattering away, talking about the industry and what you've achieved and how you think about things going forward. Fortunately, we haven't got a beer in front of you, so apologies for that. But I think Labatt's is quite a nice one, and they do some pretty good craft beers. But can you talk to me, Reese, a bit about the venture capital bit, the corporate venture capital piece? How did it get started? How's it achieved what it's got now? And then I think that will bring in Paul quite nicely on the CTO side.
Sure. So our program actually got started in 1999, so we've been in existence for 18 years, which makes us one of the longest running corporate venture capital units out there. We've gone through a lot of changes with Motorola over the years, but one of the things I always like to point out is we never stopped investing. We stayed active, and every single year since we were formed, we've done multiple investments. The group has always been, I think, very well supported from the top of the organization. Our CEOs throughout the years that we've had the venture capital program have always been very, very supportive of what we're doing. And today, as we'll talk about as we get into this, this program is very, very visible at the most senior levels. And just a few stats to give you a feel for the history here. Since inception, we've invested in 210 different companies. We've had 12 IPOs out of the portfolio, 131 M&A exits, I think pretty close there. And we had 4 companies that were bought by Motorola over the years. That's really not a thesis of ours, but it's happened. And then we've also, as Motorola spun out some companies and made some divestitures over the years, we actually moved some of the portfolio companies and some of the team members with the spun out entities as well. So it's a long history, a very solid program, great results both strategically and financially. And we, just to kind of lead into the connection with Paul. So Paul became part of our investment board several years ago and was one of the great supporters of ventures, in that role. And then about 3 years ago was when we actually moved under Paul, and there were, a lot of reasons to do that, which, Paul can talk about.
Sure, that's great. Where were you before then in terms of reporting line?
So we were reporting into finance. So before Motorola, what we call the separation, when the company split into Motorola Mobility and Motorola Solutions, just before that time, we were reporting into the CSO. But as the separation occurred, we got moved under finance. And so that's where we were for, I want to say, about 5 years until we moved under the CTO organization.
I suppose, Paul, were you happy about that? Was this a poison chalice, or sounds maybe not? But interested how that move happened.
No, I was actually thrilled about it. I was actually kind of lobbying behind the scenes to try to access it a little bit, and I'll get into a little bit here why I think that was important and why I think it was helpful to us. But first, I want to thank the organizers. This is the 3rd time in my career I followed an astronaut, and it's never gone well. So anyway, we'll see if maybe this one will be we'll break the streak here. So I think we heard a lot today about innovation, and of course that's my main charge as a chief technology officer of Motorola. And the real trick is how do you tap into all things that you can in the world to harness creativity wherever it's at. And I think the GE gentleman said it really well. I think companies that think that they can innovate every aspect of what they need to deliver a value proposition to their users by themselves, they're doomed to fail, because there's almost always somebody out there doing it better, cheaper, faster, stronger than you are. So I always say that venturing, there's really 3 reasons to do it. One is it gives you access to something you don't already have, accelerates your path down a trajectory much more quickly, so it gives you velocity, and it keeps you humble, because again, there's almost always somebody out there that's got a better idea than you do. So if you're not paying attention outside in, it's a serious mistake. So what you see here on the slide is sort of a high-level blueprint, and it's not that different than what was described earlier. There's a really tight coupling now between the corporate strategy organization. So venturing for venturing's sake is not a very good recipe for success. We had a time in there where we tried that, and it was kind of, I won't say it was kind of like spray and pray, but it was a bit of a kind of a hit and miss kind of proposition. So we start, how we found our strategy as a corporation is we start with customer research. So I have a group of ethnographers, a group of human factors engineers, so they go live days and lives with customers. And we like to say, even though a user, may not be able to tell you what he or she wants or needs, if you watch them the right way, they'll show you. And so these are folks that watch and give us those hints, help us spot those, unmet opportunities where we can maybe plug in. Then we, do a little bit of vetting on the efficacy of it. And just because it's a good idea or it's a problem that could be solved, doesn't mean now's the time to solve it. And in there is the art of figuring out, not only is it an interesting problem, a problem worth solving, but is now the time to try to solve it. So that's where the strategy organization comes in, and we intersect with that. And then once we do that, then we start the journey of, okay, so how do we bring that vision to life as quickly as possible? So Sarah talked about design thinking, and design thinking is a really, really important ingredient we've mixed in over the last couple of years. So a little quick anecdote, we're going down the journey of a new concept, and he used design thinking to bring an idea to life. And so I was talking to our CEO, and we showed him some new concepts that were kind of born this way. And I told him, I said, Greg, we're not going to show you what we're going to do. We're going to show you what we need to do and figure out how to get there. And so you bring it to life that way, and then the race begins. How do you start it up, and how do you actually cause it to happen? And then you'll see in the middle there, we plug in, and we've got themes of technology that we use in my group that are supportive of the strategy. And the specifics aren't that important. It's just important that we found that you have them. Because that's what we then hand to Reese and his team and say, look, find us differentiation, find us people who are doing things better in these areas, because almost certainly those visions that we have are going to plug into those somehow. And you see out the top, you see Motorola Solutions Venture Capital Group feeding that innovation process up front. So there, I'm a direct consumer of the investment we make, and Reese will talk a little bit about how we set up the thesis for the investment, but we always bring that in, and I'll make sure that there are people to work on it. So it doesn't just come in and look for a home. The other way we would use it is when we get much further in the life cycle, much more mature concepts, and you see to the far right, that's when we get into the big D part of the equation and the development organization starting to build product. And so there, it's the same idea, but there what we're finding is a much more mature, later stage concept is important because they want to put it into a value proposition they present to customers. So it needs more maturity, more efficacy, it needs to have something that's actually deliverable. So just to summarize very quickly, you start with an idea that's founded in research, line it up with a strategy, feed it into the technology themes that you're actually innovating with, use ventures as an accelerant, bake it into an outcome, or use it as an accelerant or as an adder to your value proposition on the customer side when you're getting later stage.
And so I would just add to this chart, if you look at it, in the middle where you see the tomorrow, several of the investments that we make are longer-term strategic theses. Every investment we make does have a strategic thesis, and I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes here. But in effect, the CTO organization is the initial consumer of several of the investments we make, and then usually, as Paul was saying, the more mature ones tend to be more business unit aligned and business unit sponsored. So today we do have a sponsorship model, and really the two key sponsors of any investment could be Paul, and again those are the more longer term, and then Bruce Berta, who's the head of our products and services, is really the other sponsor. So that's the way it works.
Before we leave this, one other quick point. It was referred to earlier about the point of death for an innovation and an idea and then actually it coming to fruition. It's right down the middle there. If you look at the bottom where it says align and then transfer, that's what Jeffrey Moore refers to as crossing the chasm. And that's in corporate speak, that's when you cross that line. And you're always leaning into what is, value propositions that are well established, and you're competing for mind share. And so we do a lot of work inside of the CTO organization to fuzz up or blur that line so that it isn't we bring a mousetrap to the doorstep and say, look, it's a better mousetrap, take it and run with it. That doesn't work. Rarely does that work. Because usually the mousetrap doesn't fit into the organization structure that's ready to receive it anyway, let alone the fact that it may not be something they recognize. So there's a lot, I would say, if there's anything we've worked on really hard, and Ventures helps us, again, bring it to life to show the efficacy of the innovation, is to get across that chasm.
great. So, in terms of the portfolio and the management, to bring that on, I mean, you mentioned, Paul, a little bit that there was a time when you went more financial. What happened to those companies, that spray and pray? Because, my quick maths was like 130 odd, M&As, a dozen or so IPOs, 210 deals. There's about 67 somewhere.
Yep.
Do they just fizzle out, or are they still part of the portfolio?
Yeah, I mean, they can disappear in various ways. In all the travails of Motorola, as it's divided and split, some of the company portfolio goes in other directions as well. So we don't necessarily own them all anymore. But I will say this, though. Obviously, what I've kind of explained is when we make an investment, we're counting on that investment to yield something. It's not just a strategic bet looking for a financial return. So Reese and team do a fantastic job of vetting these companies and making sure that the probability of success of that company's thesis is very high, because we really want to build around that and use it. So I would say his hit rate is phenomenal compared to almost anything I see in the industry. Yeah.
Yeah, and Jim, I'll just add to the math, the missing numbers that you're referring to is when we spun out, for example, the Motorola mobility business, 20 portfolio companies went with them. Those are the ones that were strategically aligned to that business. When we spun out our semiconductor business, 11 companies spun out there. And then when we sold the enterprise business, I think it was 14 moved with the enterprise. So that's where the math is. Historically, and this is something that's really, I think, pretty amazing. We've had less, than 10 out of that 210 companies return no capital at all.
Wow.
I mean, that's a pretty amazing statistic. I want to say it's 7 or 8 that, really were, zero return. But we've been, very successful. And particularly financially. However, I think what happened, and part of what led to the change, was we weren't getting the kind of strategic success that we wanted anymore. And I think part of it was because a lot of our investment focus had been with some of the businesses that had spun out and whatnot, but we were really struggling, to be honest, with the public safety business, which is a core business of Motorola Solutions. And moving under CTO was really transformational, and it really goes to this culture issue we've been talking about today, because one of the things that Paul immediately did with me is said, you need to start educating the company about what you're doing again. And so we did a couple of different global broadcasts, excuse me, of talking about what Ventures does. And I mean, it really got people engaged. To this day, every week I'm hearing from people who want to, get involved, learn more. So I think that was really important. And one of the things I always talk about is if you know Motorola and Motorola Solutions, who would have thought that last year, if you walked into the lobby of our building, you would see a big sign that says, "Think like a startup." I mean, that, really represented, a transformation of thinking that's happened. And I really, do appreciate Paul's efforts in helping us take that message forward. We've had, internal news stories, all these kind of things. We celebrate our investments, and that really, really does embed them into the culture. In the last couple of years, when we've had these innovation days at Motorola, where we lay out the Motorola invented innovations, we lay out the portfolio company innovations right in there with it, too. And so it's, we bring them into the family, and that really does impact the culture.
Sure. I might ask, Reese, one of the things that we talked about earlier in the day was this idea that, venture capital, corporate venture capital in particular, is quite a flexible model. People can be purely financial, purely strategic. Most people seem to be some sort of blend. And then they could be near term, they could be slightly longer term, and there's that flexibility. But I'm just interested, could you share some tips for how to go about dealing with that different management reporting line? Because like you say, reporting to a CFO, they're looking maybe for different things, and a CTO, people might report to a CSO or directly to the chief executive. And just be interested from your perspective over, effectively nearly 14 years, maybe some tips on how to go about managing different almost, can we call it personality types?
Oh, absolutely. You know, one of the things we do is we actually have a deck that we call the education deck, because whenever new people get involved in the company and that, you know, become part of our circle that we're going to deal with, it's important that they understand what we do, why we do it, and we try to, you know, get their input into it. We try to, you know, it's not like we're going to them and saying, this is how we do it, you know, this is, you know, you got to follow this, but we're, you know, actively looking for input and growth, because I think it's important that, you know, your company continue to evolve to meet the needs of you know, all the people in the company. And a great example of this was when Raj joined, our CSO joined about a year ago. We sat down and kind of mapped out what we call our hunting grounds, which is our search areas. And Raj, you know, helped us kind of reframe them in I think in a really effective way that we've been using going forward. So we really do try to, you know, deal with the evolution of the people in the company. And the other thing, and this is a good slide just to highlight it, is we have developed over the years, and I think, and again, it's really come to fruition the last few years in the CTO organization, a very well understood, repeatable process. All of the key people in our company understand this document that you're seeing right here. And it really, it shows, you know, the way it's going to work from the time that we, you know, have an opportunity presented to us. We see about 800 opportunities a year, and as somebody said earlier, about 1% is the right, you know, hit rate. But even more importantly, you notice in these blue boxes, we have put in place a liaison team. That's from the business, from strategy, from the non-ventures part of CTO, and they really help us vet opportunities, whether, you know, again, whether they be the shorter term or the longer term. Each investment, I mentioned it before, has an executive sponsor. It's going to be Paul, or it's going to be the head of our business and products group. And then the third role I'll mention that you see towards the bottom right is a business unit champion. So when we go to pitch an investment to our investment board, what we do is we make sure we have a business unit champion in place. And this is somebody who's going to spend a significant amount of time. We don't have a, you know, specific percentage, but a significant amount of their time is going to be spent working with us to try to make sure we achieve the strategic thesis of the investment. And we have developed a plan for each of the investments, which we'll get into in a minute. But, you know, that's an important role. And then we started getting really good at getting these companies integrated into our products. And then we went, holy smokes, we're getting them integrated, but we're not selling them right now. What's going wrong? So last year we tweaked the process again, and we added this role you see on the bottom right of sales champion. So, in effect, everything we invest in some way, there's a integration or a co-creation thesis behind it. When that is done, in effect, now we have in the process the opportunity to hand over to what we call a sales champion. And that makes sure it gets in the price book, the sales team gets trained, and we can actually go out and sell it.
So, do you want to carry on talking about sort of, you know, some of the wins, the successes that you've had in terms of the portfolio? Obviously, you know, Motorola bought 4 of your portfolio company, but understanding what that strategy is near and longer term and how the portfolio can help, I think will be great between you both, actually.
So, you know, first of all, and let me just touch on this. This is, I think, another important piece, and Paul, jump in, because, you know, it was really, Paul said, you know, we really need to, you know, document what we're trying to achieve here. Because one of the things, and for those of you that are corporate VCs out there, you know what I'm talking about. You know, the really difficult question is, how do you capture and measure strategic value? We all struggle with this, and And this was really, I think, a terrific idea that we implemented and this is something that's managed and really owned by that business unit champion that I mentioned earlier, but we in the ventures group work very closely with them. These are reviewed by our investment board, which is our senior management team, on a regular basis. And that really introduces some accountability into the equation, which I think is very important. And so I bring this up because I think this really helps drive us to success. And you see, in the way it's set up, it's a milestone-driven chart. For the nearer term, again, those business unit-aligned investments, that milestone is driving towards a revenue forecast and an actual revenue. On the longer term, the CTO-sponsored investments, that chart is going to drive towards where we can hand it over to the business unit and put it into that part of the investment life cycle. But this was, I think, really important to help us start to gain some success.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is you use the word accountability. That's the bottom line. So we won't make the investment if there isn't an accountable executive. And a key attribute of the business unit champion is they can allocate resources. So if you can't allocate resources against a plan, it's not going to succeed. So they have to be of that level and that stature. This is also a thesis we share with the company we invest in. So they know what we're doing. They know why we're doing it. And so they know where their role is and how they fit into what we're planning to do. So totally transparent on both sides.
Yeah, that's great. And could you talk about some of the successes in terms of more specifically, give a sense of actually how things moved? I think one criteria we'll talk about it. Is that sort of, can you create $1 billion business unit or those types of opportunity? Yeah. Is there anything significant from Motorola Solutions?
Yeah, why don't you go to the next slide, Reese? I mean, that's a good place to talk about that, I think. So we'll give you a few examples of what we've done with these guys. So this is one example. It's a messy slide, but really this was an ecosystem play. And what you see here, the notion we had was that police officers, in this case, mobile field workers, firefighters, pick your favorite, will become walking arrays of sensors and walking arrays of different modalities for communication, whether it be audio or a head-worn display, using AR and VR. So increasingly building technology around the human being, but with efficacy and with a rigor that allows it to be tractable. I mean, you and I have a wearable experience today. It usually looks something like a device, a Bluetooth link, and an application on our smartphone. If you have two, then you rinse and repeat. This was really around, our thesis was let's bring some coherence around that structure, and whether it's a device or a mobile application or whether it's even enabling technology. It could be something like you see at the bottom, indoor location, the holy grail for a firefighter. To the left, you start to see natural language processing and voice-based communications. To the right, you see things like head-worn displays and eye interaction to actually manipulate information and technology. So this is an ecosystem play. We didn't envision ourselves building most of the ecosystem. We envisioned ourselves making the ecosystem coherent. So here you start to see we enabled this, and you can probably count on here like 8 or 9 at least different venture investments a recent team made around this single theme of the connected first responder of the future. So bringing this whole thing to life around that, and again, our real value is the software and the platform that sits at the center of it. And so we could never have demonstrated this with the efficacy that we did had we tried to build all these pieces. And oh, by the way, it would not be successful if we were the ones trying to build everything into it anyway.
Yeah, and so as you look around this chart, I mean, we've had some financial success, from the standpoint that Recon Instruments, iFluence, API.ai have all been sold, actually. But we've also had some great, strategic wins with these companies. We have, commercial collaborations with TRX, which, as Paul said, is really the holy grail of, indoor location, for a firefighter. Imagine, the burning building scenario. We're going to show you a couple of videos in a minute here that show what we're doing with a couple of the others. And then there's also, I'd be remiss not to mention SceneDoc, our current Canadian company in the portfolio. It was nice to see earlier that we were listed as one of the more active investors in Canada. We've been investing here for a long time. This is a great country with some great technology, so we're up here quite a bit. We always have 1 or 2 companies in the portfolio from here. Today, SceneDoc is one. Obviously, Recon Instruments, many of you probably know they were in Vancouver. They got acquired last year. One of our co-investors is out here too. But you know, and we're going to continue to to look in this country for technology to invest in. But all these companies are all collaborating with us in different commercial ways. So that's really our end game, is strategic partnerships. It's not the financial piece is nice, but that's not why we're in it. We're in it to really develop and cultivate strategic partnerships.
Yeah, actually, I tell my CEO I will commit to him to over a year's break even, and that's the hurdle we have to achieve. And so he's perfectly okay with that because he understands why we're doing what we're doing. Maybe to set up the next video, which is what comes next. Look to the right here where you see recon and iFluence. So think firefighter or think police officer, and go back to the research comment I made earlier. One of the most fundamental pieces of research we get back is eyes up, hands free. And if you think about it, no matter if you're trying to repair something, trying to help somebody, save a life, stay alive, or just simply deal with a traffic stop, makes perfect sense. Stay focused on what's around you, keep your hands available to do whatever it is you need to do. But if you think about the way you and I consume mobile intelligence today, the slab of black glass, what is it? It's eyes down, hands busy. It's exactly the wrong paradigm for what these people need to do. So first thing that flashes into mind is, well, head-worn display. That would be a really good thing to try. And that's the eyes up part. But now what about the hands-free part? How do I interact with it? Verbal commands are not so good. Imagine you're standing at the side of a road trying to make a traffic stop and you got traffic blowing by. We all know how frustrating natural language processing can be, especially in noisy environments. So the idea, Reese discovered a company, iFluence, they actually do eye tracking. So anything you can do with a mouse, you can do by moving your eye. It's the most amazing thing. So we said, oh gee, let's take these two pieces, put them together, and that should give us a really, really effective way to achieve mobile intelligence, still eyes up and hands free. Now, for a variety of reasons, it turned out that recon and the head-worn display wasn't the right thing at the right time yet for public safety. Police officers really don't want anything messing with their field of view. It's the wrong platform for mobile field workers. They're really looking for more of an AR kind of a setting. But then what we said was, but we've got this confluence of data now that's flooding in to people now, generating so much of it. What if we could create a command center? So, you and I have seen command centers. They're basically rooms, walls, mission control, tons and tons of screens and a lot of complexity. What if we could take that and collapse that down into a platform that somebody could wear and actually interact with? Take it mobile, take it to an incident scene, whatever the case may be. And what if they can interact with it in a most natural way? So what started as one investment thesis pivoted to something slightly different. And the video we're about to show you will give you a sense of what that's all about. By the way, in terms of data, that's another thing we spend a lot of time thinking about. The prediction is that there will be 50 zettabytes of data in the world, in the digital universe by 2020. Anybody know what a zettabyte is, by show of hands? Wow, okay. It's 10 to the 21st bytes. So does that help? Not really, right? So think of it this way. I found an estimate for the number of grains of sand on the planet Earth. Picture every beach, every desert, everything you can think of, all the sand that you can imagine. A zettabyte is 100 times more than that. So it's a lot of data. So that's what we're struggling with now, is figuring out how to harness that data and reduce it in a meaningful way.
All right, so we're running down on time, so we'll get to the video very quickly. I'll just mention here this next slide, just real quick. Here's an upcoming book. We were actually interviewed for a book that'll be coming out in a couple months that I thought we just mentioned. Keep your eye out for this, Unleashing the Innovators.
Yeah, Jim Stengel was the he was the CEO.
Futuristic police technology is on display in Orange County today. It is meant to help fight crime in a new way. Now, this is a virtual command center meant to put law enforcement officers right in the middle of the action. Devices like drones and 360 cameras send data to a headset that an officer can operate just by moving his or her eyes and head, and help make those decisions in the field remotely.
The more intelligence we can provide them in a usable, consumable way, because they have very special needs. They deal in high-stress environments. So the more intuitive we can make the technology, the more we can bring it into an environment that's usable to them and actionable in real time, the better they are, the safer they are at what they do.
Motorola says some local law enforcement agencies have tried out the technology and expressed an interest, but because of confidentiality agreements, they could not tell us which ones.
But back to the cultural thing, this is, like I said, we bring in our investment companies, we bring them to press events and things like that, and it's, we really pull them in and make them, part of the culture in that way, and I think that helps them and it helps us too. And then we have one more video to show you. This is actually our most recent investment. We've already started a great collaboration with them. I think you'll see what it's all about.
Motorola Solutions is exploring how real-time artificial intelligence can help police find a person of interest more quickly and efficiently. A person of interest search starts with a physical description. AI, combined with body-worn cameras and other software from Motorola Solutions, can search and analyze quickly and efficiently. As officers patrol, the command center sends a description. Software in the body-worn camera detects faces. These are compared to the initial description, taking place in real time in the field, or what we call at the edge. It is no longer necessary for streaming video to be sent over the network for processing and analysis. It happens locally on the device. When a potential match is identified by the edge device, relevant information is processed and uploaded to the system for further action. The command center confirms the match. Nearby devices are notified of the find. AI at the edge means more devices searching, real-time analysis, and reduced network traffic. Officers can find a person of interest faster and more efficiently.
It's very cool technology, and like I say, that's actually one of our most recent investments.
It's kind of creepy too, I admit. But where I think we can take this is increasingly, and the bet is intelligence will just be more and more efficient at the edge. Moore's law is going to take us there, so that's the expectation. Right now, the video analytics are to the point now, it takes more processing than you can realistically get in a package like that, but video analytics are to the point now where they can actually detect with microfacial expressions your mood. They can actually detect if you're being deceitful. So put that into context when you're talking to your spouse sometime, just beware. But so, we'll get there. There's a lot of policy questions around that, though.
Cool. We've got a final 5-6 minutes or so I'm keen to make sure there's some questions as well. It's a great opportunity to talk to CTO and a living legend in Reese. So we've got a question there, please. Do say your name as well. Thank you.
My name is Gilles Duruflet. You mentioned several times that you rely on many resources from Motorola for your job. So the liaison team, the business champion, the sales champion. So how are these people rewarded and incented? Is it just part of their job description, or is there some kind of incentive? How are interests aligned?
So I get asked that question a lot. So there's no special incentive, if you're talking about like monetary, additional monetary incentive. But there is a lot of incentive. People really enjoy working with startups. Like I say, we have more people want to do this kind of work than we can handle. So there's a lot of reward in working with the startup. It lets people exercise their entrepreneurial spirit, and it is part of their job. So as they get their job performance rating, of course, this is going to factor into how well they're doing their job. But I would argue that for most of them, they would say it's one of the most fun parts of their job.
Yeah, I'd just add, you have to curate the people pretty carefully. I mean, they can't be perceiving themselves as in competition with the investment, or it really won't work. But I think if you get them out, focused on the outcome, they're excited at accelerating down the path to an outcome.
Yeah.
Great question to you. Frank.
Frank Clemens here from DuPont Ventures. In your first slide, you had today, tomorrow, and then in the future, and your corporate venture group is really going from today and tomorrow. Why aren't you looking at the transformative type of startups and companies and working with them? That's one question. Second question is, how do you onboard your startups? So you have now, or you've gotten into agreement with the startup. How do you bring them in and work with them? How do you interact the parent company with the startups? Things like that.
So I'll take the first one, you take the second one. How about that? So the answer is we are. It's a really good observation. I think in the interest, Reese mentioned earlier, making sure we have traction and targeted applicability. We did pull a little further to the right on that chart on purpose, partially because we wanted an accretive value proposition to build on and to test with. What we have done though, and we took it off the chart, but now we've actually pushed in, there was a lot of talk about incubators. So we've gone into Israel, and they make it very easy in Israel to actually establish some things that are very much earlier stage with very low financial risk where you can actually curate the content coming in. So we've actually working on, or actually have established an incubator with the Office of the Chief Scientist and some partners there, specifically around AI and tapping into Startup Nation there. So we're doing that as a bit of an experiment, but it's a really low risk experiment from my point of view. So that's how we'll pull back up the food chain.
And to the second part of your question regarding the onboarding process, if you recall the value capture plan document I showed, that's something we'll collaborate with the startup company on. So they're part of that, and that usually gets presented at the same time we'll pitch the investment to the company or to our investment board. So they're part of it. They know, they understand, and we're agreeing the milestones, because if we can't agree with them on the milestones, we're going to fail. So that's an important part of it, right up front. And then after an investment is approved and closed, we typically have a kickoff meeting. And at that time, we bring in not only the business unit champion and the people that have been immediately involved with the investment, but now is when we start to cast out further, who are the other organizations that might also be interested in this technology. So we try to, bring those people into a kickoff meeting too. And then, as I mentioned, so that's the onboarding, and then the ongoing management of it, as I said, is these value capture plans are reviewed on a quarterly basis at a senior level with Paul and basically our C-suite minus our CEO, but the entire executive staff. They will review these and they care about them. I mean, they, if you think about it, this is a very basic thing. It's almost like, do you need to say it? But you're making these investments to benefit your corporation. You should be able to show that it's happening, and if it's not, get help.
The thing I just throw in, it's a personal style thing, but I reach back to the CEOs of the investment companies periodically, personally, just to chat with them. I learn a lot about my company through their eyes as well.
That's a great point, actually. I think that's really, it's a good way of seeing it, because it's that sort of reversal of how you perceive rather than how do you feel you are. So it's a great point. We're nearly out of time, so in the interest of sort of keeping on track, we've got, I think, one more just over there, but very brief, quick, Twitter style.
Real quick question. This is John White from Sabic Ventures. We're also a corporate venture of a mature chemical company. Question about your investment thesis. You mentioned that some of your portfolio company successfully got acquired or exited. So apparently that's a good financial return. For those deals, how do you justify the strategic value, or how do you extract strategic value for those kind of exits?
How do we, the last part of it?
How do you, I guess, justify your strategic value for those that you actually exited?
Well, one thing, we are, what I would say, pretty light on what's called strategic rights when we do an investment. That way we can continue to get good visibility on a pipeline. But one thing I always insist on is that we do have some sort of notification if the company is going to be acquired, if they get an offer, not a ROFR, but but a notification. And it's important because then, I may hear about it, or I may know about it because I'm a board observer in the company. But we really try to keep a wall. We don't give that information out freely. But that notification right is an ability to tell our business this is going on. And they can either decide they want to jump in and do something themselves, or what's happened in a couple of these cases I mentioned, they said there was a really clean way to button up the relationship, where it was, and everybody was happy. So. But that's a great question, and one of the things that Paul's been really trying to instill on my team is this whole idea of think about the end game, and we really need to talk that through with the business when we make investments is, what could happen and what do we really want to happen at the end.
Yeah, just really quick, I'd just add to that. I mean, that last point Reese made is important. Think about the exit outcomes and what you're going to be willing to live with and what do you want to do to protect against the things you can't. And then one example, just very quick, about how we can rationalize strategic value. One of those portfolio companies Reese mentioned was a natural language processing company. We invested in 3 years ago. That technology wasn't available anywhere. I didn't want to build it. Now I can get that technology in a lot of places, but we use them to prove the efficacy of the idea.
That's a great point. Well, please join me in thanking Reese and Paul. Thank you, Reese. I'll take the clicker.
Yep.